I still get anxious thinking back about what happened in the summer of 2023. It was the year that I had my first success with my online business, which allowed me to start traveling Europe while working and saving up for my dream of buying some farmland. 2023 started amazingly. I lived a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who studied abroad. I'm originally from Germany. I'm 32, turning 33 this year, and the first few destinations were a wonderful contrast to the miserable cold winters that drag on for months in Germany. After having a tremendous time in Malta and Budapest, it was already the beginning of summer. My final destination that summer was to visit a friend. His name was Ben. He's about a year younger than me, and currently studying medicine in Varna, located in the very east of Bulgaria. It's an interesting place with lots of Soviet-style, slightly run-down architecture, but it still has its charm as a beach city. The people there are very nice, and there are some beautiful spots. There are many expats, and I spent my days enjoying the large parks near the beach itself, and the various cafes and clubs. I met lots of people, and frequently went out to beach clubs with them on weekends. It was a nice hot summer, and I was enjoying myself. Until one particular night. You see, I was out with Ben and many of his university friends again. We had partied all night, had drinks, danced for hours, and just enjoyed ourselves during this wonderful summer night. Since we'd been to day events before the party, I started feeling tired and I decided to head home eventually. I should describe the layout of the city quickly as well, as it's quite unique. Varna has a beach along its entire length, and for most parts there are very big parks stretching for kilometers along the beach before they lead to the city. My rented apartment, it was slightly northwest of the clubs, roughly a 10 to 15 minute walk, which I'd done many times by this stage. People had warned me about occasional attacks or muggings or robberies or whatever, always asking me to walk at least part of the way with someone. I usually didn't listen, just walked with my music playing, though I remained wary of my surroundings at all times. That night, a few people who were also tired left with me. They lived a bit more west of me, so I had to leave them after about 5 minutes or so, and continued alone with my music as I always did. It must have been around 4 in the morning when I came to a park that I usually cross, separate from the main beach parks, closer to where I was actually living. Being summer and a weekend, there were still a few people walking around and driving, even at like 4 a.m. When I entered the park, I wasn't shocked to see someone sitting on a bench, maybe 50 meters ahead of me to the right. He was sitting there, staring at his phone, and I remember the scene vividly. Behind him were some bushes and trees, but as the lighting in the park was very sparse, I only noticed at the last moment that somebody else was approaching him from behind through said bushes. I think because I walked into the park, the guy sitting on the bench must have briefly looked up from his phone and heard somebody approaching. Honestly too, it all happened so fast. I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy, still sitting there as he turned his head. Not immediately realizing the danger, I kept walking briefly before stopping. The guy on the bench screamed and ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I pulled off my headphones and just stood there watching, not fully comprehending what was actually happening. You need to understand that this all happened really quickly. Until the guy who had just tried to attack the other person with a rock suddenly turned to face me. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run. When he lifted that rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction, I instantly turned and I ran for my life. He followed me for roughly 2 minutes. I could still see him behind even after crossing the street. I ran around the block and was incredibly relieved to find a kebab shop still open. I rushed through the door. The people inside were shocked and I couldn't speak straight, but I didn't need to say much as the psychopath came to the store and started bashing the window with the rock. And suddenly, when the glass broke, he finally ran away. Now, what makes this even more chilling is that I later discovered that I probably encountered someone who wasn't new to violence. In the same city, same park, someone had been bludgeoned and killed with multiple stabs in the back just 1 year earlier. I waited a few minutes, I put my music back in, and I quickly walked home, carefully avoiding the park. Afterwards, I was shaking at home, locking every door, I couldn't sleep well, and the next morning I discovered that I had fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. I'm forever grateful that this whole thing turned out okay, obviously. I'm also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing may have actually saved both me and the guy on the bench. I mean, if I hadn't invented that park at that exact moment, the man on the bench, he really might not have noticed his attacker in time. While this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean once, I think that I learned that there are some situations that you really just cannot control. Stay safe out there, everyone, and maybe don't walk through the park alone at 4 a.m. in a foreign city. But hey, maybe that's just common sense. Over Valentine's Day weekend, my new wife and I spent our honeymoon in New Orleans. We stayed at the St. Charles Hilton near the French Quarter. It happens to be an old Masonic lodge from the early 1900s. The building is beautiful and has been rebuilt or added onto over about 100 years. It is an 18-story hotel with ballrooms, a Masonic chapel, and a secret theater even. Now, the first night there, we had some bad dreams. I don't really have bad dreams. I tend to have more lucid dreams, so it felt strange, but things definitely got weirder. On Thursday, February 13th, my wife and I woke up early, took the streetcar to the Garden District, and wandered through the streets for a bit. We visited an old cemetery and checked out the architecture and some shops on Magazine Street. We had such a great time walking the streets that we wandered back to the French Quarter on foot. We kept exploring the town and had some food and drinks and all that. We got on each other's nerves a little bit by the end of the night and returned to the hotel around 1 a.m., a bit tipsy, but not out of line for us. We promptly went to bed, and around 3 a.m. I found myself in a dream on the 3rd floor of the hotel. Our room is on the 5th. I just came off of the elevator and peeked around the corner to a seating area outside of the ballroom. There was a woman dressed in a black lace high-collared dress sitting on the couch, and it looked as if she were cradling something. Her dress was old, she was dim in color, and her dark hair was up in a sort of coiffed bun. I stared at her for a bit, pulling back and then peeking again. Next thing I knew, I was on the elevator again, and the doors opened to the 1st floor where there were 3 big lights glowing purple, green, and yellow, the Mardi Gras colors. At this point, my dream seems to change, and I realize that I'm not wearing any clothes except my big pink granny panties, like the dreams most folks have in high school or college. I started to panic. The only thing that I can think is that there are bathrooms on the 2nd floor, and the dream sort of fades again, and I'm trying to open the bathroom doors on the 2nd floor, but they're locked. At this point, I remember that we have a room on the 5th floor. I hurry to the elevator, cupping myself. I get to the room, pounding on the door, calling my wife's name, and after a minute, she finally lets me in, and we both freak out as I tell my story. It was 4 a.m. at this point, and yes, I was wandering the hotel in the middle of the night, naked for who knows how long. She didn't hear me leave, and the door was heavy enough that I had to work to open it. After a good panic attack, I called the front desks. The gal didn't want to talk about it, but assured me that nobody could get the videotapes without a subpoena. We both took time to calm down a bit, and I eventually went back to sleep at around 6 in the morning. Now, I have not slept walk since I broke my arm and my collarbone when I was about 4. I tried talking about the incident with the night security gal on Friday, but she said that she doesn't mess with that stuff. On Sunday, I asked the evening front desk gal about ghosts in the building, and she told me of a man on the 5th floor, a woman in black on the 3rd, and a woman in white that was seen anywhere between the 2nd and the 14th, technically 13th due to skipping it, but she told me about the building history and the Masonic Lodge, and gave me a cool printout of the history of the building. I then told her my story, and she was creeped out but wanted more details about the woman in black because she wasn't seen much. She believed me though, and honestly that felt pretty great. Over the rest of our stay though, we still had some rough dreams, and sleep only came to me after about 4 in the morning. The TV also turned on by itself multiple times, which was very weird. I still don't know really what happened that night, and I have no idea how I ended up on those floors and what was going on, but I cannot help but think that maybe I was possessed or something. So my roommates and I are young girls living alone in our college townhouse neighborhood. The house was built no later than maybe 3 to 4 years ago, and honestly that's really pushing it. But lots of weird stuff has been happening, and last night it all sort of came to a head. So we're all Christians, and I grew up Catholic, so we all very much believe in spirits and demons and all that, and the power of Christ to defeat them. I had a dream maybe a couple of months ago of my dog growling at an evil presence, and I rebuked it in the dream in the name of Jesus and woke up suddenly because my white noise was off and it was 3:33 a.m. I wasn't totally terrified by that or anything, but then my coworker came over and said that she swore that she heard me banging around in the house and the back of the house when I wasn't home. And it keeps happening. I always hear my roommate banging around in her room when she's not even home. We will hear knocking on the walls, and I've heard my dog rustling around in his kennel when he's right next to me, etc., etc. And so I thought that maybe there's an animal somewhere. Until last night. You see, last night I was sitting on the couch doing some homework and watching some TV. I let out a low whistle and I immediately hear it repeated back to me. Again, I am all alone, and so I rewinded the TV to see if it was just a really well-timed coincidence, and there was zero whistling. So I called my sister, who lives 3 houses down, to come over, and she runs over and doesn't see anyone outside around the house or anything. Naturally, I go through the house with my industrial wasp spray can and check to make sure that there's nobody actually in the house. I came back to where my sister is, and she says to me, "Don't whistle right now, I'm freaked out." But I can assure you that I didn't whistle at all, but she swore that she heard me whistle again. My roommate finally comes home, but I tell her what happened and eventually I leave, offering her to come with, but she says that she's fine and just wants to go to bed. Then she texts me in around maybe an hour or so and says, "Are you back home?" And I say no, and she tells me that she heard me talking this whole time, and I just said yoo-hoo, trying to get her attention. So she heard me talking too. Obviously, something is in this house, and my question is, as a Christian, is what the heck do we do about this? How do we get rid of it? And can we even get rid of it? I've experienced many paranormal encounters while on duty as a police officer, but there was one call that I went to, a death notification, that really freaked me out. I had to contact some family members of a deceased woman that was involved in a fatal car accident a few miles away from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway just inside of the property gate. She said that she had heard me coming from miles away, and I asked her if she lived at the residence, which she confirmed that she did. After asking her to speak with me at the house, she agreed, but she said that she needed to walk as the house was about 75 yards from the road. After making it to the house, I approached the front door on a small wooden porch and began scanning the driveway for the woman. It was about 1 a.m. at this stage. While looking for the woman, the front door opened and a younger woman appeared. She was obviously concerned about my presence and asked if everything was okay, and so I asked if I could speak with her and any adults inside, and they welcomed me in. I told her that I would wait for the woman I met near the gate, and she told me that nobody else should be home. I then freaked out a bit and began searching the property, but there was nothing. After entering the residence, I told her and her husband the news about Susan, which ended up being her mother, and she said that her mother moved in a few months back after her father had passed and wasn't handling it well. While she and her husband were comforting one another, I began looking at photos on the wall. There was this picture of a middle-aged woman that stuck out to me. She was a younger version of the woman that I spoke with near the gate, and while looking at the picture, the daughter confirmed that that was actually her mother, the woman that had passed in that wreck. Honestly, I really have no way to explain this. I mean, did I really speak with the ghost of the individual that died in the crash just before telling her family about what happened? To give a tad bit of background, my family is heavily Catholic, and I find myself a bit skeptical in anything spiritual or religious, I guess. Really, I just don't know how else to explain what has happened to me. When I was maybe 14 to 16, maybe as a way to distance myself from the church, I found an intense interest in the occult, paganism, things of that sort. I would even practice witchcraft from time to time, in an attempt to get some kind of definitive proof that something is out there. Nothing really worked, but it did feel like something was happening when I practiced. A practice I got especially into and would do frequently is meditation, which isn't inherently spiritual, I know that, but it does help in certain cases. Anyways, this story starts while I was meditating in my room. I am maybe, halfway through my 15 minutes that I'd planned to meditate when something just felt wrong all of a sudden. I cannot properly explain the emotion that I had. My best attempt would be the feeling of going down off the peak of a roller coaster, mixed with a sorrow of sorts. Anyway, so I feel that in my gut, and I open my eyes to scan the room. Everything looked in place, but that feeling just wouldn't go away. I turned to pause my timer, then I noticed a painting on my wall, which I had for quite a while at this stage. It was the Starry Night painting, and as I scanned over to it, something about it was just wrong. It looked as if all the stars were actually glowing. The longer that I looked, the more bright a certain star got as well. It was one of the stars in the top left corner, just to the right of the trees. This star slowly but surely got brighter and brighter, and I was so sure that I was dreaming or hallucinating or something that I had gotten up off of the bed and started to make my way toward the painting. But as I got up and started to move closer, the star would fade. Not as if someone was dimming the lights though. It was as if a fog was setting over this star. As I got even closer, the fog practically snuffed out the star, and in its place it was dark. I sat for a minute trying to just process what had just happened in my brain, still looking at this dark spot on my painting. As I stared though, something started to appear out of the dark noise. At first, I thought it was the star coming back into my vision, but as it became more clear, I saw it for what it really was. A face. A whole figure, actually, big enough to cover a large portion of the painting. I remember my fight or flight kicking in when realizing what I was actually looking at. I distinctly remember thinking that the feeling of that experience went from curious to bad. Still, I stayed in place and waited to see what else would happen, like I was in some kind of trance. Once the figure was fully visible, I felt like it saw me. We were looking at each other eye to eye, soul to whatever it was, and we sat there for 20 seconds or so with nothing happening, and I was about to be done with this and run out of the room, but then it did something. It started to reach out its hand, not in a threatening way, almost as if it was offering something. I don't really know what it was selling, but I certainly wasn't buying. Its hand almost looked as if it was fully outside of this painting as well. This was the last straw. I'd gotten my taste of paranormal for the night, and I ran to my light switch and flicked on my bright overhead light. I had a dim lamp on for meditation, and looked at the painting. And suddenly, it was totally normal. Nothing different about it. I sat and stared to see if something would happen, and nothing ever did. As I was coming back from my trance, I realized my face was wet with tears, something that I hadn't noticed before the light was on. I then go to my phone to text whoever, telling someone about this, but I stopped before even unlocking it. Almost 30 minutes had passed since I had paused that timer, and that felt like an impossibly long time. There was absolutely no way that I spent 30 minutes staring at a painting just then. It felt like maybe 3 to 4 minutes of watching, tops. After realizing my little time loss, I freaked out and ran into my mother's room. Needing somebody else's presence, I just couldn't stand being alone anymore. She heard my whole story and was 100% convinced that I had just had a run-in with a demonic presence. Putting meaning behind all of the visions, like how the stars were holy ghosts with demons putting a fog over them and all that sort of thing. I didn't know if I was fully on board with that idea, but I was just glad to be with someone other than myself. She then got my dad to go in and bless the room, leaving a Saint Benedict medal in my room to hopefully ward off anything negative. He then took the painting off the wall and took it outside, and that was the last time that I ever saw it. To be honest though, good riddance. I'm actually sharing this now in the same room that this all happened in as well. I won't lie too, I kind of feel off at times in here, I guess. Like I'm being watched, but having the medal and several crucifixes does help ease my feeling. I'm 19 now and about to be headed out for college, and I thought that I would put down this experience in writing before it fades anymore with time. I'm not exactly Catholic now, but I have given up the practice of my past. I'm fully open to any and all explanations that anyone may have as to what happened to me years ago, paranormal or not. And so, if you have anything to share, then thank you. Also, I'd like to just tack on here that I was absolutely sober during this entire experience and the entire day before that, and hallucinations are definitely not something that I've ever struggled with. I, a 33-year-old male, am a skeptic when it comes to anything paranormal. I generally don't believe anything related to the paranormal, and would find explanations for what may be deemed paranormal. Well, except for one which happened to me and my siblings back in 2000. My family, my parents and 2 younger siblings, lived with our grandmother in a 2-story house. Our family lives on the ground floor, whereas my grandmother, she has the 2nd floor to herself. My parents have a separate room while my siblings and I share the same room in separate beds. Our bedroom and our parents' bedroom was connected by a sort of shared bathroom. My grandmother usually comes to our room and uses our bathroom to pee as well, and I guess it was to check up on us as well while our parents weren't home yet. Anyway, one night, our parents took an unusually long time to come home. So to pass the time, my siblings and I just watched Beauty and the Beast in one of those VHS tapes since it was our favorite Disney movie back then. We were watching the movie for some time when suddenly the door to our room just sort of spontaneously opened, and a few seconds later, the door to our toilet opened and closed, and we heard the flushing sound of the toilet. This was followed by the opening of the toilet door and the opening of our bedroom door. I remember my siblings and I being in a sort of state of shock, and we huddled together on the corner of the bed just sort of crying. I also distinctly remember that the television turned to static, and my siblings and I were freaked out the entire time. At the time, my siblings and I were around 9, 8, and 5 years old, so we were fully aware of what was happening. Eventually, our parents arrived and saw us crying, but they really didn't think anything of it. Well, the next day my mother took me to the bathroom and she told me that my grandmother had actually passed away. I was certain that I did not tell them about the events that happened the previous night, and more than 2 decades have passed and my siblings and I never really discussed it. I conveniently thought of that event as a false memory since I never really got any confirmation from external sources that whatever happened was actually real, nor was I able to talk about it with my siblings. I just lived my life thinking that I never truly had a paranormal experience. Anyway, I'm currently doing a PhD in the United Kingdom, and I visited my family back home in the Philippines during the holidays. The entire family was in the car, and we were talking about grandmother's last birthday celebration. We were part Chinese, and she may have been like 70 years old for that birthday, so it was a special celebration and thus memorable. We were just sort of reminiscing about the event, but then my mother suddenly mentioned, "Do you remember about the day that she died and you were crying even though you didn't know that your grandmother was dead?" She then went into some detail about the events that my siblings and I experienced that night. Apparently, my younger sister had told my mother about that night when it was her turn to be told about my grandmother's passing, and that confirmed everything for me, and really freaked me the heck out. So, this happened to me, a 27-year-old female, about 6 years ago. At the time, I was working in a bar, so I got off work pretty late, usually around 3 a.m. Since I lived quite close to the bar, I would always walk home after my shift, and there were 2 different routes that I would take. One was along the street, where most of the city's bars and the clubs were, and it was usually really crowded. Since I was pretty exhausted and I didn't want to see any more people that night, I took the other route, which was much quieter but also much darker, and I never felt very safe there at night. Anyway, as I was walking, a group of drunk guys approached me, blocking my way. I made it clear that I had no interest in talking to them, so they eventually let me pass. A nearby taxi driver must have seen what was going on because he rolled down his window and asked if I needed a ride home. I declined, saying that I didn't have to go too far, but he insisted, saying that he wouldn't even charge me. I thought that maybe he was looking out for me since he had seen the incident with the drunk guys, so I made the really stupid decision to accept this offer. After I got in, he asked for my address and we started driving. I even offered to pay him, but he refused. Shortly after, we arrived near my home, but instead of stopping, he just sort of drove past it. I asked where he was going, and he acted like it was an accident, saying that he was just looking for a place to turn around. But he kept driving for a few more minutes until we ended up in an industrial area where he pulled into a dead end. At this point, I was terrified, but honestly I didn't know what to do, especially since my phone had died earlier. I just sort of sat there and eventually said, "Well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to turn around." He looked at me, and I think he got scared to follow through with whatever he had planned. After a moment, he simply said that I was right, turned the car around, and drove me back to my place. My heart was pounding as I got out of that car, but I was really, really grateful that nothing terrible had happened that night. I know that it was incredibly stupid to get into that car in the first place, and I still don't fully understand why I made that decision. Honestly though, I think that I just got really, really lucky in the end. So, before I begin this, I would just like to say that this is a true story, and I am also of sound mind. So when I was 7, my family moved into a haunted house. There was an abandoned house that my friends and I would pass on our walk to school. It was in need of a lot of work. The grass was overgrown like a hayfield and the driveway all tore up. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. And well, my friend and I decided one summer day to check it out. We thought that it would be a good idea to smash some of the windows out. We broke a sliding glass door and poked our heads in, and it immediately gave us chills. It was super eerie and oddly cold for a summer day in there. We dipped out and we never went back after that. Well, fast forward a few months and my parents tell me that we're moving. I jump in the truck to go with them to look at the house, and when we arrived, my heart instantly sank because it was that same house. I was really nervous. I thought that they knew my friend and I had broken the windows and I was about to get in trouble or something, but they didn't say a word about it. And it was just by some sort of fluke chance that it was the same house that apparently we were buying. We ended up moving in and my stepdad fixed the place up a bit. It was still eerily cold inside, and I remember the layout being very strange. The kitchen, for instance, that was in the basement, and there was a long L-shaped hallway that went behind the kitchen and really led to nowhere. The weird events, though, they started happening shortly afterward. The first one was when I was laying in bed one morning. I was awake but with the covers over my head, and I felt something that I can only describe as a fist being dropped onto my face. I ripped the covers down off of my head immediately to see who it was, but nobody was there. I kind of shrugged it off as a really weird occurrence, but later I'd find out that something was in that house and it was really ticked off at me. I can only assume that it was mad at me for breaking the windows or whatever, but I was walking down the stairs to the basement one day when I felt a shove in the middle of my back. It pushed me off the last 2 steps, like plain as day, as if somebody was behind me. I obviously glared behind me, but there was nothing there. Again, I shrugged this off as another weird occurrence, until it happened again. Exact same staircase, exact same steps. Something pushed me for a second time off of the last 2 steps. I really didn't want to tell anyone because I figured that they would think that I was going crazy or something. And truth be told, I thought that I might have been a little bit crazy. But fast forward a few months and my stepdad tells us that he had something freaky happen to him. He said that he was doing the tile in the bathroom and said that he saw a face in the tiles looking back at him. But it wasn't his reflection. It was a completely different face. Well, we ended up moving out of there and decades went by before I even thought about it again. I told my wife the story and wanted to bring her to the house. We drove to it and, lo and behold, it was exactly as it was almost 30 years ago. Abandoned, the grass overgrown, and no renovations done on it at all. I drove by it the other day and now it looks like somebody might be living there. I would genuinely love to talk to them to see if they experienced anything, but I also really don't want to freak them out, which really is what brings me here. What do you guys think that I should do? Should I just go and talk to them, or should I approach this a little differently? So I want to share a story of my childhood home in upstate New York, and I thought that you guys might like it. I personally don't know if I believe in the paranormal because, other than this house, I haven't experienced anything else. So, when my dad and my mum first bought this house, my dad was working at a nearby music store. I think it was anyway. While working here, he said that a very suspicious old man would come in, often wearing bones on his necklace. My dad, being punk and 20-something, thought that this necklace was awesome and asked the old man about it. The old man told him that they were real bones. My dad, messing with the old man because he didn't believe him, told him that he wanted a human skull. The man said that he could get him one. My dad thought that this was hilarious, and after a couple of weeks went by, he started to forget about it. But one day, that man came in and actually gave my dad a skull. My dad was very surprised, obviously, but assumed it wasn't real, and so he took it home. My mum, who is very superstitious, was really mad at my dad and told him to get rid of it. My dad decided to put it into the basement and forgot about it, and after this, the house was just never the same. My aunt told me that she saw my brother, who was probably a toddler around this time, being held by a little girl out of the corner of her eye. My mum also claims to have seen this little girl hanging around me and my brother's rooms when we were toddlers. My mother soon began to have horrific dreams and would see people standing by her bed. She woke up on multiple occasions screaming bloody murder and claiming that there were men in her closet. Weirdly too, sometimes she wouldn't even remember these fits. Now, when I was around 5, I started to have extreme night terrors as well. I would also sleepwalk, and one night my mum woke up in another scared frenzy that she would have. She quickly went to my room to see that I wasn't there. She went downstairs to see me sitting crisscross applesauce in front of the TV that wasn't even on. When she asked what I was doing, I told her that I was watching my show and that I wanted to hang out with my friends outside. I don't remember this, by the way, but my mum carried me upstairs and put me into bed. Eventually, too, my brother played with a Ouija board and claimed to see my mum standing up straight in bed with her eyes staring forward. When he tried to talk to her, she simply got back into bed and just went back to sleep. Another time, another thing that would happen is that you could hear people walking up and down the stairs, even when you were home alone. There was often knocking on my walls as well, and after my parents got divorced, my mum decided to move out of this house. The basement was very big and cluttered, so we called someone with a big garbage truck to help us empty it out. When my dad moved out, he didn't go looking for the skull because he had forgotten where he'd put it down there, and after cleaning up the whole basement, going through everything, we never found that skull. There was no creepy history in that house as well, mind you. We actually knew the woman whose father built the house in the 80s, and other than this woman's family, we were the only other people to live there at the time. The last time that I was in that house before leaving, I truly felt terrified as well. Like something was telling me to get out and leave. I ended up running out of that house in the end, and now my mum and I sleep just fine, and I've not experienced anything else like this, paranormal or whatever otherwise, since we moved out of that place. So I would just like to say that my knowledge of all things paranormal is extremely limited. So please, keep that in mind if I sound like a total idiot here. Also, if you have any questions, then do feel free to ask me in the comments below. I know that I'm awful at explaining things. So, I've told this story to a few of my close friends, but besides that, nobody really knows about this. To set the scene, I'm 12 years old and it's a cold Ohio winter. My parents were divorced, and on this particular day, I was staying with my dad and his girlfriend at the time. His girlfriend had a daughter, Allie, 14, and she had a boyfriend, Evan, 14. At this time, I saw Allie as a sister because I grew up with 5 brothers and no sisters, so I wanted her to be my sister so bad, and on this particular night, Allie and Evan had invited me to join them at a youth group event across town. I was reluctant because it was for high schoolers only, and I was in the 7th grade, but they eventually convinced me, and so we went. We walked across town in the freezing cold, and after about 20 minutes, we made it to the right building. I don't remember if the building was actually a church, but it was a 1-story building. There were doors on both ends that were connected by a hallway, so if you looked in the glass on one door, you could see down to the other door, is what I'm getting at. When we got to the building, nobody was there and the only light on was a singular light in the hallway. We were annoyed that Evan had gotten the date wrong and we walked in the cold for no reason, and so we decided to rest at the building for a few before making the walk back home. As we approached the building, I remember Allie looking into the window on the first floor. I remember watching her jaw drop as she looked into it. Next, Evan looked in and started describing what he was seeing, a tall figure in the hallway. My heart dropped, but I honestly thought that they were just messing with me. But then I looked and I saw it too. As I looked in the window, I see a tall figure in the hallway, but it looks like it's crouched down. It has insanely long arms and legs, and when I look in its general direction in the process of standing up, immediately I can tell that it is as tall as the ceiling is. It was wearing a suit or something and had extremely pale skin but no face. And as it's standing up, it's waving its arms around like crazy. The figure looked eerily similar to the Slender Man, but I know that that's just a creepypasta. Really, I don't know how else to describe what was standing in front of me, but immediately I take my eyes off of the window, but because we were dumb kids, we decided to take a walk around the building before we left. I tried to avoid looking through the windows, but there was a sort of tapping noise that I heard as we made our way around it. I'm not sure that was anything paranormal, but it was weird, and so I thought that I should add it. One final note too is that I talked to Allie years after it happened, and I am like 99.9% sure that it wasn't something that they had planned just to scare me. I think that we all genuinely saw this thing, and I'm just so curious to know what it was and what any of this means. So if there is somebody out there who knows what this is or can give me any sort of information about it, then I would really love to hear your thoughts. So back in 2017, my wife, or girlfriend at the time, and I were living in this house as young adults, 19-ish years old. I was smoking a bit, not even good weed too, but just some mid stuff, and we were watching something on TV. My wife wasn't smoking. The TV is hanging on the wall, and to the left of the TV is the hallway. The left side of the hallway is the bathroom, the right side is the spare bedroom, and the straight back was our bedroom. While watching TV, I noticed a black shadowy figure glide through the bathroom door, glides across the hall and goes into the spare bedroom. Obviously, it didn't open any door, just sort of went through them. The figure was roughly about 5 feet tall, I would say, and very broad-shouldered. So I see the figure appear and disappear. I instantly thought that my weed was laced or something. I started looking at my blunt, even though I felt fine, and I really didn't say anything about it. I thought that I was just seeing things, so I started laughing a bit. While this happens though, our dogs were laying at my feet until the figure appeared, and they were suddenly terrified and got on the couch with us. My wife asks, "Why are you laughing?" and I replied with, I thought that I saw something." And she immediately replied with, "Did it come out of the bathroom?" That's when we talk about what we had seen, and we both were seeing the same thing apparently. Same description of it and everything. After it disappears, I get back up to check the spare bedroom and whatnot, make sure all the doors are locked and all that, no windows open. I check the ceiling fan because it was on, just to see if the shadow of the fan blades could have possibly been whatever that we saw, but there's just no way possible that it could have been that fan. With the dogs getting scared and just being able to sense a great presence of energy that night, I fully believe that it was a ghost or a spirit or a demon or something similar. 7.5 years later, and I have never experienced anything remotely close to this again. The backstory to the house too is that it was my wife's aunt's house, and she had let us take over to rent it while she moved out with her boyfriend. I don't know much about the house otherwise, but The aunt never experienced anything like this and thinks that we were just tweaking out on weed. Note too that we stayed in this house for a few more weeks before we finally moved out. This is a true story of an experience I had as a child with what I knew at the time as the Moose Man, but which I now suspect was a Wendigo. I've told several of my close friends about this, and I think back on it often, wanting to write it down all the time, so here I am. When I was a child, my family would go to my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. I was one of the youngest of our cousins, of which there was a large group. My grandmother had a secluded home, backed up to the expansive woods. Her house was adorned with Native American artwork and artifacts. My cousins and I would go off and explore the woods behind her house together, walking atop old rock walls and playing with the frogs in nearby ponds. The air was sweet and thick back there, and so it was really pleasant. The area was historically home to a large Native American population, and there were some interesting features in the woods evidencing that history, including an abandoned sweat lodge covered in animal hides, which I always was too afraid to explore, and old stone arrowheads in the dirt as well. Well, one Thanksgiving, one of my older cousins and I paired off from a larger group when we were back in the woods, seeking to explore further into the woods than we had ever gone before. We walked about 15 minutes or so through a fairly thick, unfamiliar portion of the woods when we arrived at the top of a large rock outcropping at the edge of a steep embankment. The hair on my arm still stands up thinking about this too, and even right now as I share this it does too, but I saw a tall humanoid figure in ragged clothes at the bottom of the embankment, about 30 to 40 feet down, facing away from me and my cousin. I was curious but wary, wondering if the figure were a dummy or maybe someone that was injured and needed our help. I considered calling out, but saw the figure move slightly, and suddenly I was full of fear. Without making a sound, I tapped my cousin and signaled for him to look down at the figure. We looked back at each other, and I was hoping for a sense of reassurance, but I could see a dread in his eyes that shot down my spine. And when we looked back down at the figure, it turned toward us. This tall, lanky, ragged humanoid figure had the face of a moose, and it was looking dead at me. We locked eyes, and I cannot explain why, but I knew that it wanted to eat me. We didn't wait, we didn't even scream. My cousin and I just ran away as fast as we could possibly run, back the same way that we had come in. As I ran, I could feel that we were being pursued, and I was younger and a step slower than my cousin. The air also suddenly grew thicker and hazier, and the woods changed around us. All of a sudden, my cousin and I came into the clearing in the woods that did not exist when we had passed through originally. The air there was particularly thick, almost green, with fireflies floating everywhere. The ground in the clearing was also marked with circles of mushrooms. It was very disorienting, and it felt like the clearing was sort of luring me in to stay forever, when all of a sudden I heard my mum call out to me through the woods. She, along with some of my uncles and aunts, came to look for me and my cousin. We were the last two in the woods, and it was getting darker. It was time to sit for Thanksgiving dinner. Her call, though, pierced through the fog of this experience, breaking whatever curse was on me and my cousin, allowing us to finally run away and escape. My cousin and I, we told the others what we had seen, that we had been pursued by a moose man who wanted to eat us, but obviously nobody believed us. And I mean, I probably wouldn't have believed my own senses either, if not for what happened next. You see, after dinner, all of the kids went back outside to play in the yard, running behind the sheds and cutting in and out of the woods at the edge of the yard, evading and capturing each other in a game called Manhunt. I was still afraid from before, but took comfort in numbers and proximity to the house as well. As a large group of us were trying to locate the last of the fugitives, one of my cousins shone a big flashlight into the woods. And there, our whole group saw one of our fugitive cousins in a bush, and standing right behind him was a tall, ragged humanoid figure with the head of a moose towering over the bush. We all instantly screamed and sprinted back inside, and that was obviously the end of the games, that day at least. Sometimes I bring up this event with my cousins to see if they still remember, and they do, but they really hate to talk about it. This all started when I was 6 and lasted until I was about 8. I lived in a house with my mother, my 2 brothers, my mother's friend Tracy, and Tracy's boyfriend Paul, along with 3 of their boys. I was the only girl with 5 boys. This house was in a small town in Ohio as well, and since I was the only girl, I had to have a room by myself while all the boys slept together in the same room. And every night, and it never missed a night, I was awoken terrified to a little boy screaming and crying, while I would hear a woman say, "Shush, almost done." You would think that this could possibly be one of the other boys in the house and my mother or Tracy comforting them, right? Wrong. You see, after many nights of being awoken and terrified, I would start to sleep with my mother, and I still remember the first time seeing this little boy. It was one night when I was sleeping with my mother and she got up to go to the bathroom. I was hearing the same thing this night, so I ended up following her. When my mother was done in the bathroom and we were walking back into her bedroom, I look into the empty room, which isn't a bedroom, and I see a black small silhouette of a little boy standing there staring dead straight at us. I ignored it and followed my mother back to bed, but I would like to add that every night I could hear the woman walking back and forth down the hallway whispering. I remember one night in particular that I was laying there under the blankets terrified, humming to myself while the same thing happened, when out of nowhere I hear a woman whisper into my ear, "You're mine." That morning I saw the little boy again. I was laying in bed wide awake and I could see out the bedroom. This bedroom was at the end of the hall, by the way. And you know how the end of the hallways where there's like a wall? Well, I saw the same little black silhouette of a boy come out of the wall and walk slowly down the hall, staring straight ahead of him. I would like to add as well that I knew each time the crying and screaming would eventually stop, but still, that didn't make it any less terrifying. I lived by a railroad, and every time the railroad would go in the very early of the morning, all of it would stop. Fast forward a couple of months, and everybody's thinking little me was crazy because nobody heard or saw anything at night. Until Paul, Tracy's boyfriend, spoke up and said that if he's up late at night by himself, he would also hear and see, and I quote, "sketchy stuff." I cannot remember any specific circumstances after the ones that I mentioned above, but like I said, this happened for years, and I tried to look up any information about the house, but I couldn't find anything. I used to think that it was just spirits, but now that I'm older, I believe that it truly was something darker than just spirits. This happened to me a year ago, outside of a famous department store in Mexico while I was waiting for the bus. That day, I went to buy a birthday cake for my best friend, among some other things. So I had a lot of things to carry, and I usually walk home. It's not that far, but since I had a lot to carry, I decided to wait for the bus. It was around 4 p.m., and since I was in a very central part of the city, there were a lot of people walking around and waiting for the bus. So I found what happened next really, really strange. I was leaning against a window of the department store while carrying the bags and trying to keep my balance so the cake wouldn't slip, when a woman approached me and started talking to me. I don't know what I look like, since people always approach me to talk to me easily, even though I'm quite introverted, so it didn't seem too strange to me at the time. However, One of the first things that she said to me was a warning. Something like, "Be very careful with your things. There are very bad people around. Someone can steal from you." I took it as kind words and really didn't pay too much attention to it. However, the woman began to ask me where I lived, what bus I took, what my parents' names were, what they did for a living, where I would go. The questions were probing, to say the least, and it gave me a bit of a bad feeling. So I lied about all of them, following my mother's advice regarding strangers. And then she began to tell me nonsensical things about her personal life, and she really just had no verbal coherence. I didn't understand anything she was saying, as if she was telling me random stories and connecting them in sort of absurd ways. I noticed that there was something very weird about her when I examined her too. Her face was delirious, looking almost to the sky, her eyes opened wide when she spoke nonsense to me, and she had a disheveled appearance that I had not noticed before. I sincerely thought that she had schizophrenia or something like that. And then she began to get very close to me, invading my personal space and repeating the same warning from the beginning over and over again. I began to get scared by this, and I moved away from her. Even a woman saw us and also seemed surprised. And at some point, the woman cornered me and got so close to my face that I felt as if I was being harassed or something. I forgot to mention too that when I said which bus I would take, she suddenly said that she was going to take that one too, even though she told me that she was going somewhere different. She spontaneously made up that she was going to visit her brother or whatever, and that's why she would take that bus with me. I then told her that I think it would be better if I walked in the end because the bus was taking too long, but she just would not let me go. And when I insisted on going, she told me that she would accompany me because she was going to the same place. Honestly, I didn't understand what she was saying, and in the end, already quite nervous and scared, I told her that I would walk, and I said goodbye pretending to be nice, and I simply walked to leave, and then she started following me from behind for about a block. When I turned to change street, I had to run without even caring about the cake until finally I lost her. I've had to omit a few observations to keep this shorter, but I got the impression that if she didn't have any intentions of assaulting me at any opportunity, then maybe she was waiting for us to be alone somewhere so that she could do something worse. Sometimes these are kidnapping tactics in Mexico where there are more people involved and all that. Luckily, it was the afternoon and there were a lot of people still walking around, but really, I don't know what would have happened if I had gotten on that bus. Would she have followed me? To what extent? And to do what? I still don't know, but I'm glad that I never had to find out. Years ago, when I was 11 and living in Hawaii, I had an intense feeling of dread all of a sudden. Just absolute dread hanging over me. I believe it started Friday and kept building till Thursday. Then next Friday it comes again. I go to school and strangely I don't feel it at all, but the second that I get home, there it is, and it's worse than before. I knew too that somebody was going to die that day. I absolutely knew it was going to happen to somebody in my family. I spent all day in the living room watching everybody like a hawk as well. I didn't feel it directed towards anyone until later that night, once it got dark. It had been building and building, and I felt like I was going to explode. Then my mother walks by me and grabs her keys and says that she's going somewhere. I didn't really listen. The blood in my ears was too loud, and all I could see was the keys in her hand and her mouth moving but no words. And I knew then that it was her. If I let her go in that car, I knew that I would never see her alive again. And I flipped out. I had an absolute freak out. I threw myself at her feet and grabbed onto her legs and started begging and screaming for her to stay home, just begging and pleading for her not to leave. I was absolutely hysterical as well, and I just couldn't control my emotions at all, switching between gut-wrenching cries, pleading, and attempting to grab the keys from her hand. At some point, I started saying, "I don't want you to die," over and over again. "If you leave, you're going to die." She was so startled and scared by my behavior that she sat on the couch next to me and held me and put on the news for ambient noise. I had successfully gotten her not to leave the house. This probably happened around late 8 o'clock, but distraught 11-year-olds do not check the time, nor care to. It's now roughly 9-something, and my mum decides to switch channels to a different news channel. The story being told was kind of inappropriate, but by that time I had kind of calmed down a little bit, but was still sniffling. The feeling of dread had died, but a weirder, more undescribable feeling had replaced it. Kind of like anticipation, but with a negative spin, but definitely not dread anymore. The news channel that she chose was describing and showing helicopter footage of a 13-car pileup on the main road that connects to the road leading to our neighborhood. And it had happened around the time she would have left, and they were still covering it. There were only a few survivors. Almost everyone had died, and the survivors were severely injured, and they weren't sure that they would even make it. The pileup happened on the road that she definitely would have taken. We both sat riveted to the TV, watching them interview the bystanders who had witnessed everything, and the people who had barely avoided the crash. They were shaken, terrified, and crying. They interviewed a man that had tried to save people from the crash, and he was covered in blood and describing the bodies and talking about how he couldn't save anyone. He was beyond shaken, and his body was jittery from the adrenaline and fear. Me and my mother, we just sat in silence. My little siblings were there too. They had come out when they had heard the screaming, but I don't really remember them doing much, so they aren't very relevant to the story. What happened afterward is a little bit of a blur for me because the sheer relief or devastation that I felt was awful. My mum lived, obviously, but all of those other people had died, and it really felt rotten. I hugged my mum and thanked her for not leaving. She said that she was glad that she didn't leave too, but didn't really speak much, and honestly, I can't blame her. I mean, what's there to say? Me and my mum slept in the same bed that night, and I still couldn't let her go. I needed to know that she would be okay and would still be alive in the morning. She didn't ask me how I knew, but made an offhanded comment about me being psychic the next day. I guess I forgot all about this, but I remembered it all today and have been feeling all sorts of things ever since then. I confirmed everything with my mum as well, and she says that it was the weirdest experience of her life. I still feel kind of crazy. I mean, my brain forgot about all this, but my body remembers the strain of the dread that I was under. I'm feeling the physical effects of it at this very moment, in fact. Almost like PTSD-like symptoms. In 1999, we lived in a badly possessed or haunted house for about 8 years in Beaver Creek, Oregon, and genuinely, I really don't like talking about it. It's honestly very cliche horror, story, or textbook sort of stuff, and people think that I'm just bullspitting, so I prefer to just keep it simple. But literally, the house was at a deal with weirdly boarded up rooms. The family had been sleeping in just one area together. The whole affair was an awakening and a sort of you get what you pay for sometimes, go with your gut type lesson. It all started pretty benign though. We immediately took down all the boards to open the rooms and couldn't figure out their purposes. The rooms were bare but fine. We were doing construction, which is pretty typical, right? The house wasn't terribly old, like maybe 1950s. But then there was just like small stuff. One of the first instances I remember is we had the molding stacked on the right side of the hall, labeled to be put back up, and at about 2 a.m. we could hear it sort of clanking. When we checked, it had been rolled and moved to the left. We thought that maybe we misremembered the direction, but the next night, it moved back. My husband and I were suddenly always arguing for no good reason, and we'd have dread about coming home without knowing why. Also instant relief to leave, though. It progressed from there over months to full-on getting scratched, hit, terrorized for me. I'll leave some personal details out here, but it was a rough couple of years. Eventually it was bad enough that my husband had his guns missing when he'd been cleaning them only to have them reappear loaded and pointed at him off the back of the couch. It had finally decided messing with him would be fun as well. It previously really just picked on me, and he honestly considered that I was having a mental health crisis, but he kept hearing me weeping at night when I wasn't. We had called multiple churches, none of them would help. I was raised Catholic, and that was especially disappointing, but not surprising, I suppose. The Pentecostal church did eventually try to help us, and they didn't like what they found. I don't like the labels, but I'm sure you can guess what they called it, and said that they'd need the whole congregation to get rid of it, wanted me to get baptized to move forward and all that. Long story short, they still couldn't get rid of it, and it just came back, more ticked off than ever it seemed. We had to learn to just not feed it any fear or stress or anger, and we had to cleanse every couple of days for the rest of the years that we lived there. I also had a crash course in occult stuff to deal with it myself because it was pretty obvious that there was no easy access to help. I did manage it at home much better from then on though, and I took control of my own space. But we had such bad luck too those whole 8 years that we were there. My husband is a vet, and he was struggling to get his disability to 100%, even though he was forced out on medical because he couldn't work like he used to. Eventually, that house caused us bankruptcy, and we let the bank take it, willingly too, to get out. I just couldn't bring myself to sell it to someone after, well, all of that. When we moved, I was really afraid too that it was going to follow us. My husband went back up one last time to grab some furniture and stuff that we'd left. The power had been turned off with the electric company the week before, and when he came in, all the lights were on, the AC was blowing, water was running in the faucet. He just backed out and called me. "You mind if we just leave the rest?" is what he said. I didn't make him go back in, so in the end we left a sofa set and a bunch of other stuff behind. I swear though that the first night in the new house, I saw what some would call an angel. I'm not a Christian, so I just say light, and felt such peace and relief, a strong knowing that it was done and we wouldn't be followed. I couldn't remember ever sleeping so well up until that time as well, and genuinely, I loved that rental. Now, here's the thing, we found out a bunch of weird stuff after this as well. The last 3 people who had owned it before us had also filed bankruptcy, and they had been foreclosed on as well, which I found interesting. Also, once you've lived with the paranormal like that, you're more open whether you'd like to be or not, so there's always something knocking around our homes now. I no longer fear it, I'm kind of numb to it to be honest. It's really just normal for us, but never again has it been something like that either. I had a healer for a while, and she called it a forced kundalini from overexposure to a strong entity, but again, I don't know about any of that, and I'm just glad that we're out of there and we never had to go back. When I was 13 or 14, I had a nightmare that woke me up. At the time, I slept on the bottom bunk bed that I shared with my brother. Feeling relieved that it was just a dream, I opened my eyes a little bit more and see a 6-foot-tall, thin silhouette standing next to my bed. Squinting, I looked at its face, and it looked like my older brother smiling at me. I wondered what on earth he was doing in my room in the middle of the night like this. He slept in the room across the hall. But then I saw my brother's face morph into an androgynous stranger with long blonde hair and a menacing smile. It extended its hands, and in one of its hands, I saw an axe with a half-moon blade. The figure began to raise the axe above its head, both hands on the hilt, ready to strike, and it jumped toward me at a speed probably half the speed of what you'd expect. I shouted as loudly as I could while yanking my covers over my face and turning away from the figure. My scream woke up my whole family, and I can't prove that it was a dream within a dream, but honestly, it felt real to me. I also experienced strange phenomena in that room, like an RC car turning its wheels randomly in the quiet hours of the early morning. Its only controller, though, was resting on my dresser, empty of batteries. My question for all of you guys, though, is, was this a mimic? And do mimics scare young kids like this? I mean, I don't think it was sleep paralysis because I was awake and moving. I don't think it was a dream because I felt like I was awake. So, what could this be, and what other being could this have been? When I was in elementary school, I was also attending music school. That morning, I was heading towards the bus stop where I waited for the bus every day. I remember that it was raining that morning, everything was still wet, and I was carrying my umbrella folded in my hand. Now, there was a place to sit at the bus stop, so I sat down, put my umbrella between my legs, and since it was the time without mobile phones, I was just looking at the ground. Occasionally, I would look up towards the street to see if my bus was coming. I looked up, glanced to the left, and saw a mailman with a big, heavy bag, holding an umbrella with a wooden handle shaped like a duck's head. I followed him with my eyes and focused on that umbrella. As he passed by me, I saw him from behind and noticed that his pant legs were muddy and wet from the rain. I didn't pay too much attention though, and I looked down for about another 10 seconds. When I looked up again, I looked to the left, and that was when I saw the same mailman coming towards me, but it was again, with the same bag and the same umbrella, with a wooden handle shaped like a duck's head. At that moment, I was sort of startled. The bus arrived. I got on the bus through the front door and watched the mailman until he turned into a yard. And to this day, I really still don't understand what the heck happened there and how it was even possible to see the same person twice within about 10 seconds coming from the same direction. Before I begin, I should probably establish some background. This happened during my senior year of high school, so about 6 or so years ago. I've always struggled and suffered with sleeping issues, insomnia, nightmares, lucid dreams, and even some sleep paralysis. These things run throughout my family quite frequently, in fact. Now, due to my negative association with my own bed, and by extension my bedroom as a whole, I would often sleep on a spare mattress in the middle of the living room. This night was no different, until I would feel myself slowly slipping into consciousness, but only due to an unusual feeling. That being my limp body being gently and slowly lifted up towards the ceiling. I distinctly recall the feeling of my long hair dangling below me too. As I floated there above my bed, I would feel this overwhelming sense of danger, doom, and plain evilness. My heart was beating intensely and my mind was racing, but I couldn't move. I tried to scream and talk, but I couldn't get anything out. It felt like an eternity until some noise from the apartment would force whatever was going on to finally release me. I would feel myself hit my mattress before pouncing up petrified. The time was 3-something in the morning, and it took me a couple of hours just to calm down. I didn't sleep that night, and for a week after that, I slept with the lights on too. What do you guys think actually happened though? Personally, I don't think it was something normal like sleep paralysis or whatever. I mean, I hit the mattress quite hard, and I remember even seeing some things moved around that just didn't make sense unless I actually fell from that height. So I work in a medical office, and my co-worker said that she came in one morning to open up, but when she got there, the door was already unlocked. All of the lights were on, the radio was on. In fact, it looked like somebody had already opened. Yet the building appeared empty. No cars in the parking lot either. Thing is, she and I were the only ones with a key, and our boss was out of town at the time. So, who opened that morning? It was around 4 a.m, whoever it was, but we all closed the office together the day before like usual. It was usually 3 of us that collaboratively did it, which we all remembered doing, so it's not that we left everything on and the door unlocked or anything. Scared and shaky, she said that she didn't know what else to do but to walk in and timidly go, "Hello." When she told me the story, I was like, "You didn't, did you?" After that, we had a running joke about how she would be the first to die in a horror movie. She would bring it up sometimes and we would laugh about it. On another occasion, my co-worker, the one who walked in and shakily went hello, said that she would be there by herself in the morning hours and feel someone walk behind her as she had her back turned. Like, you know how the air moves when somebody walks past you real close? She genuinely thought that somebody had come in, but when she turned around, obviously nobody was there. When she left later and a new girl took her place, the new girl reported the same thing happening from time to time too. On other occasions, I used to come in on the weekends to use our gym. The first time I did this, I saw a dark shadowy head peek out at me from the corner of the hallway, then sort of dart back. It was as if someone was there and I had surprised or scared them maybe. I knew that it was our ghost at that point, so I would say, "Hey, it's just me," when I arrived, so they didn't freak out. It happened the first few times and then eventually it stopped, I guess after it got used to me arriving on Sunday mornings. I was there by myself on a Sunday too when I saw a tall man standing in the gym as I passed the hallway. He was looking at me. He seemed different than the hallway peeking ghost who was shorter and not as clear, but I sort of did a double take, but when I went back to check the gym, nobody was there. Our new Filipino PT saw the same tall man standing in the back office area, as in the section where our desks and computers were, and went back there quickly because he thought that it was a patient that needed something, but obviously there was no one. He came out and asked if a patient had just gone into the back office. We said no, and the secretary got really scared, and the new PT brushed it off, saying that it must have just been a spirit. They see those all the time in the Philippines apparently, and it's allegedly nothing to worry about. That certainly didn't help us though, and made all of us really feel a bit more unsettled, I guess. In any case, I was closing up one day, and I was the last person to leave. I had to stay late to finish paperwork, and the activity always ramped up past 5 p.m. if there was anybody still in the building, or sometimes on weekends too when we weren't supposed to be there. I heard an elderly man say "help me" as if he were right beside me, and I knew that nobody was there. But I went around to every room to make sure that there wasn't a patient still hanging out anyway, and confirmed that I was the only one there. On another occasion, I was the last person in the building again. A patient needed to get his car towed out of the parking lot, and the tow truck was blocking my car, so I couldn't get out that day. I opted to just wait inside for them to finish when, all of a sudden, I heard dishes crashing in the kitchen. We had this tiny kitchen or laundry room area at work, and it was as if someone was violently throwing them. That day, I didn't even bother checking it out because I knew what it was. Instead, I decided to just get out of there as quickly as I could and to just wait outside. Personally, I think the ghosts, or whatever they were, just didn't like it when we were invading their personal time. After office hours seemed to be the worst. The incidences were less frequent during the middle of the day or work week, unless we just noticed them less perhaps. These are only my own accounts, but my co-workers had other things happen to them too, and I didn't get all of their stories. One minor one though was that the secretary said that she was working late at night with our billing lady to set something up on the computer, and the radio turned on by itself. It was all static, which it was never like that, before it started flipping through channels. She got really scared by that, and in the end they just left. Anyway, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask about pretty much anything, but I don't work there anymore, and to be honest, I'm actually grateful for that. Not long ago, my mum and I were talking about ghosts and scary stuff, since the house she has now is also haunted, and she told me a very frightening story. So that day, she needed to do the laundry. For that, you needed to go downstairs in the basement. She got downstairs, and while on her way down, she started to feel anxious or watched, a little bit scared. You know that weird sort of bad feeling that tells yourself that you should not stay there? That's what she had. Like I said though, she needed to do the laundry, so that's what she did. So there she was, putting the clothes in the washing machine. This feeling was still there and was growing. She tried to not give it attention and to just keep doing what she was doing, but the sensation of being watched was now more menacing than before, so it was becoming harder and harder for her to just ignore it. And then, while she was still putting the clothes in the washing machine, she heard something growl. A low, long, menacing growl, but it was coming from far from her. My courageous mother decided to stay there, just going faster because now she truly was scared, which is understandable. A couple of seconds later, she heard it again, a bit closer to her this time, and a lot more menacing. She finally started that washing machine, but now she needed to take the clean clothes and bring them upstairs. While she was taking them to transfer them into a basket, she heard it again, and it was closer. So close that she felt its breath this time caressing her neck. In panic, she finally decided to just get upstairs, getting out of the basement. Not even after she got like the third step though, she felt something grabbing her foot. Not exactly, but you know what I mean perhaps. She almost fell at the hold, and again she heard this growl. Luckily she didn't fall, so she kept going faster and scared now. Then, not even at the halfway point, she suddenly lost her breath. She described it like someone was strangling her, just without the feeling of hands around her neck. She also says that she felt like a hold on her, making it harder for her to get up the stairs. It was like somebody was pushing her, forcing her to get back into the basement. She fell at that all of a sudden, and without any air, she literally needed to crawl up the stairs. Plus, she was pregnant at the time, so just imagine how much harder it was to crawl and get out of this situation. She finally reached the door though, and she said that as soon as she passed that door and closed it, her breath came back immediately and she was no longer feeling this weird feeling and this sensation of being watched. Now, she felt safe. Now, I have slept in that basement for quite some time and I have never felt or experienced anything like this. I really don't know why, but maybe since she's religious, something bad tried to do something to her or hurt her or something. If somebody has an explanation or questions, then it would be great to read it and to reach out, and I would be glad to try and answer what I can. I can also ask her for some more stories if you'd like, as she's experienced a lot of paranormal stuff. Maybe not as scary as that one, but they are for sure still pretty creepy. Anyway, thanks for listening and, well, wish me luck in this basement. I was born in Amherst, Ohio, April 7th, 1984. When I lived in Lorain, Ohio in the late 80s, I lived in this 2-story house. It was old, and there's just some things that are in that house that always left me puzzled, and in a bit of a total mystery, I guess. I'm now 40. I've talked about my experiences with other people, but all I get back is snickering, made fun of, or laughed it off as being unbelievable. I've talked about this part of my life the same way, and nothing ever changes my story. Behind our house, my mother and father created this huge, beautiful garden. And between the ages of around 3 to 5 years old, my parents would throw some weekend cookouts. My dad would invite his work or drinking buddies over, and Mum would invite her people as well. The floor model stereo would be out to play in the background, Dad would be socializing with his people, the grill is grilling, my light blue kiddie pool would be filled up with water, our front yard would be out of parking spaces, the driveway was spoken for, so the rest would just have to park their cars in the backyard where we were. Now one weekend, I decided to walk around the house by myself for some reason. I had no reason for doing so, but I was just walking. I found myself in the front yard alone, so I decided to continue journeying around the house into a full complete circle. When I had done that, I came to a shocking discovery though. Everything and everyone was suddenly gone. I mean the pool, the stereo, people, cars, even the garden was gone. What was once a garden was nothing but a bed of grass now. But here's the weird thing. I can still hear everyone. Yes, I was awake, I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't just seeing things. In dreams, when talking about dreams, you only know about 5% of the dream, and it's all over the place when telling it, right? But in this case, I remember everything. The way that I've explained it here is the way that I've explained it for almost 40 years now as well. Ever since, I've always been convinced that I've found what seemed like a portal, and so I kept doing it. It was the same result every single time. Everything was gone. Sometimes I often wonder what would have happened to me if I had just kept walking circles around the house without stopping. Would I have happened to become a missing persons case, or someone erased from memory altogether? I've recently gone back to that house in Ohio since moving away in the late 80s. I was excited to show my wife and kids the first house that I lived in. I was also excited about the thought of actually getting some answers and putting to bed this mystery. But when approaching the house, all we arrived to was an empty lot. I felt sad, sort of ticked off, and beyond disappointed. All that I have are what seems to be made-up stories, but still I live with this mystery. And that's why I'm here. I would really like to try and get some answers as to what this was, and I'm really hoping that someone somewhere has had something similar happen to them, or has an answer, or at least some thoughts. All are welcome to comment because, like I said, I am completely perplexed. For some context, I live about 30 minutes out of the city in a wooded area. Closest neighbors are about 2 to 3 miles down the road. And this could have very well been a human, which is a lot more scary to me, to be honest. But I'm really not so sure. I thought that I would share this here as it very much felt paranormal and made my hair stand up. So last night, I was woken up by my dog crying at the back door. I look at the time and it's about 3:30 in the morning. I think to myself, that's weird, as he never needs to be let out at this time. I get up and turn on the porch lights and let him out. He was hesitant to go out when I opened the door, which was also weird for him, but I watch as he runs over to the back fence and starts barking. This wasn't his normal bark too. He basically sounded like Cujo, alarmed. As I've never seen him that distressed, I open the door and call out to him to come back inside. This was when I hear it, whistling, but it sounded like someone whistling a song. I don't see anything at this point, but still freaked out because, well, I'm not sure who the heck would be out at my property at this time, let alone at all, really. I'm desperately trying to get him to come in, but he's fixated on whatever he's barking at. I run to the kitchen to grab his treats, hoping to bribe him inside. I come back to the door and I hear someone or something barking back at my dog, but in a high-pitched voice. In fact, it sounded like when a human barks like a dog, if that makes sense. I look towards where the noise is coming from and can barely make out what looked like, I don't know, glowing eyes staring out from the forest. The whistling starts again for a moment, from that direction too, and as soon as I shook his treats and called out to him, I hear a very loud and deep growl. Not from my dog, definitely not from my dog. It didn't sound human either, but that noise sounded like a very mad, very large animal or something like that. My dog comes running in through the door, straight past me and his treats, right into his crate. I slam the door behind him and lock it, brought him into the room with me, and barricade us in there till daylight. Now, I could reason that the growling could be a bear or maybe a mountain lion, but what was the whistling and the human-like barking? I'm really not sure what it was, but it was enough to scare my dog to the point where he was trembling and panting. He's a German Shepherd, and he's a big brave boy most of the time. In fact, I've never really seen him that upset. I'll admit, too, that I am terrified and hope that whatever that was never happens again. I will admit, too, that I am terrified and hope that whatever that was never happens again. was around 8 years old. I went on a weekend camping trip with a big group of people, mostly boys around my age and their dads. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to pee, so I crawled out of the tent without waking anyone up. Our tents were in a big clearing, so I walked over to the tree line to find a spot, but that's when I noticed something weird. All of a sudden, the forest went, well, quiet. I remember noticing specifically that I couldn't even hear the leaves crunching underneath my feet anymore, even though I could feel them as I walked. And a moment later, I walked up on some sort of spirit that looked like a man in robes standing on top of a stump. He had a glowing light around him, and his facial features were blurred like there was a haze around his face. Weirdly, I wasn't scared at all, and we talked and stayed there together for a while. When I finally walked out of the tree line back to the camp, one of the chaperones immediately ran up to me, saying that they'd been looking for me for a long time, hours in fact, and asking where I had been for so long. I was confused by that because that conversation felt like all of 10-15 minutes. I told him that I had to use the bathroom and met an angel in the woods. He just kind of dismissed it and he sent me back to my tent. To this day, too, I wish so badly that I could remember what we talked about, but I have no idea. All I do remember is meeting him. As a kid, I didn't think twice about it and continued my camping trip like nothing even happened. It wasn't until I was older, looking back on the experience, that I realized just how strange it all was. Has anyone ever had something happen to them like this? And if you have, what was it? I lived in the mountains my whole childhood, and when I was 12, I was friends with these sisters that lived one cul-de-sac over. The roads were separated by a patch of trees, and I would walk through them to go to play with them. And one day, my dad and I were invited to a barbecue at their house. That evening, me and the sisters and their friends, we were jumping on the trampoline in the backyard when the younger sister started acting weird. When asked, she said that she was seeing something on the far side of the next-door neighbor's fence every time that she jumped. One by one, we all tried it, and we all could see, well, something. At first, we dismissed it as the neighbor's big fluffy dog. We went inside to tell the neighbor that his dog might have gotten out and went upstairs to the sister's room. But while up there, they started telling us about a skeletal figure that would enter their room at night and watch them. The younger sister told us about one time she threw a pillow at it, and it hit the figure, and about how they think that it gets up there by climbing the gutter pipe next to their window. We all went quiet because we were scared, of course, when we heard like a clicking outside the window that clearly sounded like metal. Of course, we all dashed out of the door and downstairs to the adults because we were thoroughly freaked out. I had my dad carry me home because I was too scared to look into the dark woods. But even then, I didn't fully believe them, until they moved away a week later, and I saw the thing myself. It was late evening, and I was heading inside after playing in the woods, when I saw it peeking at me from behind a tree. It looked like a skeleton, except sharper, with spiky protrusions around its joints, and it had red pinprick lights in its hollow eye sockets. I pretended that I didn't see it, and I just hurried inside. That night, I woke up to something scratching at the wall under my window. In fact, I would wake up multiple times a week to the scratching. It was like something was trying to get my attention, so I would look outside, and exactly what spot I was hearing the scratching coming from was tall enough for an adult human to reach their arms up at. And this entity, it was adult human-sized for sure. I never did look, I was too scared, but the scratching happened for years until I moved out of that house. And that wasn't the only time that I saw the thing in the woods, but I never saw it again after I moved, so it must consist there or whatever. I don't tell this story a lot because people always dismiss it as just a deer, but that would have had to have been one consistent deer scratching at my wall 3 to 4 times a week for at least 3 years straight, which to me, that just doesn't add up. It was 2007 and I was 13. The new SmackDown 5 Raw WWE game had just come out, and I went into my small town on a Sunday morning to purchase it. After purchasing the game, I was in awe of the cover and the synopsis on the back of the game, so I sat on a bench to read it and take in the excitement of buying this new game. I lived in a small market town in England, so Sundays were often very quiet. While sitting on the bench, I looked over to the bus stop across the road and noticed a strange-looking, scraggly man walking towards me. I was a bit nervous seeing this because, although I was 13 or 14, I looked about maybe 11 as I was very small. On his approach, he asked me, "What's that you're holding?" I explained it was my new game. I then said, "Look, I need to go to my brother. He's waiting for me in the mall." Although he wasn't, I felt like I needed to say this just to get away. As I walked off, the man began to follow me, asking my name, my age. I replied Lee, which was a fake name, and told him a fake age. On entering the mall, I started walking quicker and quicker, but I didn't want to start running for some reason I wanted to save face, I guess, but he kept asking if I had a girlfriend, and as he got closer, I noticed he had a scar down his face and also lots of jewelry on. To his question, I responded yes, as I thought it may put him off if he knew that I had a girlfriend. I then ran into a shop in the mall and started flicking through the magazines, but he persisted with the questions. I then got up the courage to run as fast as I could, but he began to chase me. Eventually, I got away, and when I got home, I didn't tell my parents and I just went upstairs and played my game, but later that day I told my mum and she called the police immediately. I then had to go to a police station local to myself and tell them what happened and pick him out of a number of photos the police had on a laptop. And when I found him, apparently this man had kidnapped and done many terrible things to many young boys. And I was just lucky enough to have escaped him. So my house has, for as long as I can remember at least, had major levels of paranormal activity. It's an old farmhouse that's been passed through about 4 generations of my family, and there have been plenty of deaths on the property too. It was built around 1880, and while it's not got a particularly bloody past, it definitely has its stories. My grandma died in what would later become my nursery. My great-grandfather fell out of the hayloft back in the 1920s. They found an old unmarked grave left from the Civil War that got left behind in the 70s, etc., etc. Activity is as common as a housefly around here, really. Cabinets and doors open and shut, things get moved, footsteps in the hall when nobody else is home, figures in doorways. We hear a voice in the old grain silo sometimes, which isn't possible because if someone was in there, that they'd suffocate. None of it feels or acts malicious, so I guess we're just used to it, and sort of take it on the chin for the most part. I'm so used to it, in fact, that I completely ignored someone trying to break into my back door last night because I just thought that it was the normal activity. I was in my brother's room, fiddling with his PC for some stuff, and I heard weird knocking sounds from outside the house. Knocking is sort of normal here, but it's usually inside. But in the end, I just went ahead and ignored it. This went on for about 3 to 4 minutes before my dog started growling really loudly. So loudly, in fact, that I could hear him from across the house. He really doesn't growl at anything besides the basement door, so I thought that was a bit weird, and I went to go and calm him down in the living room. I heard the back door in the kitchen shaking and yelled, "Stop it, you're going to break the handle," because that's just the sort of thing that we say when something is getting particularly rough. And maybe 30 seconds later, I hear the door swing open, and without really thinking about it, I yelled, "I'm pretty sure I told you to knock it off." And I didn't realize anything was actually wrong until a voice that I didn't recognize cursed super loud and the door slammed shut. Of course, I immediately ran to see what it was, just in time to see a silver truck peeling out of my driveway. So, yeah, essentially, just a warning not to get too comfortable with your haunted housemates, because it might turn out that it wasn't them after all making the noise. This story takes place in a very remote wooded area in northern Sweden. At the time, I was about 15 years old. So my cousin's family were staying in our summer cabin. The cabin is placed on a hill, and at the bottom of this hill there's a lake with a wooden bridge and 2 boats. The property is surrounded by a dense forest, so the only thing that you could really see when looking out the window is the hill leading down to the lake and boats. It was maybe 9 p.m. when me, my dad, my sister, my 3 cousins, and their dad decided to light a fire down by the lake. My grandparents, aunt, and mum decided not to go because it was getting late. We just wanted to look out at the lake, stargaze a bit, and chat. We brought our grandparents' dog and our cousin's dog out with us. We walked down to the lake, lit the fire, and we started talking. After about maybe an hour, the conversation had sort of fizzled out a bit, but it was nice and quiet. And suddenly I started feeling a bit off and just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the woods. We were sitting with our backs facing the woods and the cabin. The feeling was unsettling, but I tried thinking about other things when, from out of nowhere, my dad just says, "Yeah, I'm good." Everyone turned to look at my dad in confusion since there was no conversation taking place. Dad looks back at the cabin and then at my cousin, who was sitting next to him, and said, "Yeah, I'm doing good." "What?" she responded, confused. "You asked me how I was doing, so I answered," Dad said. "I didn't ask you anything," my cousin said. Dad looked confused and then said that he had felt someone lean over and whisper in his ear, "Hello, how are you?" He described feeling whatever it was breathe on his neck and put a hand on his shoulder. He thought that it was my mum at first and turned around but didn't see anything, so assumed it was someone here. But right after explaining this, the 2 dogs that were with us started growling loudly while looking behind where my dad was sitting towards the woods. We all freaked out, put out the fire, and we started running towards the cabin. And yeah, we haven't gone outside the cabin when dark ever since then, and it's a memory that I'll never forget. Whatever it was nice enough, I suppose, to ask how Dad was doing, so I don't think it had bad intentions. But if anyone has any idea as to what this could have been, then please do comment because I would love to know. The only thing that I can think of is Swedish nature spirits called Vitra that play tricks on people, but according to some people can burn down buildings as well, or capture people if they're bothering them. In other words, they aren't really known for being nice, so I don't know. This happened when I was around 15 to 16 years old. My best friend and some of my classmates, they smoked a bit, like 10 to 11 p.m. at night, before my best friend and I split together from the rest of the guys to go and get some munch at a gas station. Behind the gas station, there was a lake with some benches where we chilled with some joints and enjoyed our hamburgers. Then suddenly we saw this guy, or maybe a better word is being, from the other side of the lake, like 500 meters away, pacing back and forth at the shore, kind of staring at us or eyeballing us like we'd kill his mum or something. He was very erratic, pacing back and forth, and eyeballing us like I said, when all of a sudden this guy dives into the lake and starts swimming toward us. Keep in mind, this is in Norway and it was between November and December and it was absolutely freezing outside, like our fingers hurt from holding the joint sort of cold. While this guy was swimming toward us, we see him doing the butterfly swim method, but this guy is swimming so quickly, like a medium fast-paced jogging speed almost. While we're seeing this guy, we were just sort of WTFing to each other, like, what is this guy doing? And he keeps getting closer and closer. We start to freak out a bit, and he was around 100 meters away when we just ran for our lives, like running as if there was a lunatic out there and we were in danger. And after like 30 to 40 minutes of running, we just split off and we ran home. Now, this story had me thinking for quite some time that, I don't know, maybe we were just high, but We all saw the same thing, which seems very unlikely. My friend and I talked about this today, and it was really so eerie to talk about this with him when everyone else that I talked to, it just sounds like a crazy guy, but we have no idea what it was. I mean, it looked like a person and, well, humanoid at least, but the ability to swim so quickly across 500 meters like that, in like 0 to 3 degrees Celsius water, is just kind of impossible. I'm one of those people, as far as I know anyway, who has never had a single paranormal encounter. Whenever I tell this story to people, though, they always believe otherwise. So I was very small, definitely not older than 7 years at the max. I was playing in my backyard as usual during the day, and there's this concrete wall that separates our property from my neighbor's, who happens to be my uncle. The wall was like broken down on one part, and you could easily go through it to my uncle's side. But you'd have to walk through almost half a mile of weeds and tall grass to get there. I knew that there were rats and some trash there too, so I just never really went back there, though I did play near the wall quite a lot. Now one day, I was doing just that while my mum talked to my grandparents in the kitchen. I couldn't see them, but they could see me and were close enough to hear. Anyway, I was near the broken part of the wall when this other little girl appears out of nowhere on the other side. She was super friendly and looked a little older than me, I guess. I remember her vividly, wearing oversized bright blue jean overalls and a pretty straw hat. I remember describing her to my mum as farmer clothes, and it made sense since this happened to be in summer. She looked like a Sarah Kay illustration from the clothes, but she was very pale, had freckles and straight kind of shoulder length, but maybe longerish hair, I guess. I have no recollection of what we talked about or what we played, but that's what we did for like several minutes. She told me her name was Margarita. She was really fun to be around, but I remember feeling weird about the fact that she wouldn't ever come to my side of the backyard, yet was very insistent that I went to where she was. Of course I wouldn't because of the rats and the trash, and that I was very certain I wasn't allowed to go there too. I remember though explaining this to her and her looking sort of disappointed that I should ask my mum first. Now this next part I remember very well. She insisted that my mum would be okay with it, that there's nothing bad like rats behind the wall and that I shouldn't be afraid. Mind you, she didn't seem angry about my objections. She just seemed sort of annoyed that I wouldn't just trust her. That made me feel very self-conscious, enough to say that I'd go, but I still should tell my mum first anyway. I don't remember her reaction to that, but I thought that she would be happy that I said yes in the end. So I ran back inside and explained to my mum the situation. She's understandably weirded out since that wall is not connected to the street or anything, and the only other girls who would go there beside me didn't fit the description at all. My cousin was 2 years younger and not at all like the girl that I described. The other neighbors were too far away and their kids didn't look anything like that either. But I remember she paused and starts talking in a way kid me is sure that she thinks that I'm playing. But I assure her, slightly offended, that Margarita wasn't imaginary. So we go outside so that we can meet her. I run back outside so I get there first. And the whole thing couldn't have taken any longer than a minute, but I don't see her anymore. Of course, I start calling out to her, thinking that she must be behind the wall, shy maybe. My mum then begins talking like one does to a kid's imaginary friend. She's talking at nothing. I'm annoyed as heck at this point. Even writing this I am, because I know that I didn't make her up. I started looking around for her, but my mum was growing impatient, and she didn't like that I was about to go behind the wall because I'm not allowed to, which annoyed me more because I knew that, but now it looked like I didn't. I expected her to come back the next day, but after that, I never saw Margarita again, which I can see is probably one of the reasons why my mum thought that I made her up. It's more of a grandma name than a kid's, I suppose. Anyway, my mum surely noticed that I was expecting to see her again, so she acted like Margarita was there already. I felt like I had an imaginary friend forced upon me, and I was still sad and angry, and I couldn't prove I was saying the truth, but I guess I was just too little and easy to influence, so I too kind of made myself believe that I had an imaginary friend named Margarita. Just that, now that she was imaginary, she wasn't the girl that I saw, because I did, and instead a big butterfly like that one butterfly Pokemon that I liked. I knew that she was imaginary, unlike the real Margarita that I met that day, and felt a bit silly playing with her, but it also felt nice and comfortable, so I had Margarita, the Pokemon rip-off butterfly, in my mind for a couple of years. But I never did forget about the real one and the feelings of my mum not believing me again. Every time I told this story, it was around the topic of my mum not believing me, but everyone always acted spooked by it. Over the years, I started to feel a bit spooked myself too, I'll admit. But who knows? Maybe I'm still too easy to influence, and I just don't know if it was real or not. Being of Middle Eastern descent, and growing up later in Western Canada, I remember faintly when we lived for a time in Saudi Arabia, where my dad was a contracted architectural engineer for a large American weapons company, where he designed and built foreign employee offices, living quarters, and buildings for the testing compounds in the harsh Saudi desert with other engineers from across the Middle East and Europe. The company that he worked for was none other than Raytheon, a well-known merchant of death that had dealings with the emirs of the land, who were swimming in black oil and luxury, and were the de facto government at the time. I remember meeting some of them too, who were rather pleasant and came with toys and candies for me and my siblings whenever they would come to our house to socialize and make their plans with my father. Little did I know, my father would tell me years later, in the comfort of our Vancouver apartment of course, that these men in their immaculate one-piece suits were quite ruthless businessmen with killers and spies in their employ. We had hosted men who were cousins, uncles, and brothers to the Saudi royals. They had toppled governments and raised up armies and militias and even terrorist groups all across the Middle East and Africa. My dad had one colleague that could build a bomb from common items in your fridge and under your sink that could level a building, and that he learned this from intelligence agencies that will remain unnamed. I was about 6 years old when we left for Canada in the early 90s, but I remember our time there, an old brick bungalow house we had lived in, a large accommodation with a sandy yard. It was a sparse neighborhood. There were other houses, but not close enough to be in each other's business or hear your neighbors' noises. Most of the people living in this area were in the employ of the royal family in some capacity. They were well off, educated, and well connected. There were several empty houses around as well that I would sometimes roam around and explore, if I found the opportunity to escape the confines of our home, that is. Now, I had heard of the jinn early on from my mother as warnings against bad behavior, or when she wanted to scare me with images of beastly ghouls. She would say that they appeared in many forms as shadows, humanoid chimera-like beings with hooved feet and tails, as transparent ghosts, or as invisible unseen forces even. She said that they could also appear as humans and that they were great mimics. They could lure you into places with the voices of people that you knew. She would also say that they liked waiting until you slept, as they could enter your dreams for unknown reasons. Many times she would also ascribe any possibly paranormal or odd goings-on to the jinn. For example, if one heard unexplained noises from an empty room, or even if objects were lost, thoroughly looked for, and later found in area searched several times, well, that was them, playing their tricks. She would often say a prayer against them and or curse them either in the singular, shaitan, or in the plural, shaitan. My mother would alert me against going to the abandoned or empty houses, for she warned me that these are the places that the jinn would occupy, waiting for wayward souls to attach to and torture. My father, being a rather pragmatic man, told me to never mind her stories, to just go and explore, but to be careful of strangers and not to be gone for too long. Now, she told me that once, when I was 3 years old, I was sleeping in my room at night, and she had cause to check up on me after being washed over with a foreboding feeling, a creepy sensation that she needed to see that I was okay. Upon entering my room, she said that there was a black shadow in the corner near my bed, that she saw it clearly for a split second, and not only saw but also felt, and she flipped the light switch on, and it just dematerialized instantly. Being scared for her child, she spent several nights in my room with me before she brought a holy man to cleanse the space and say some prayers, after which she said that there were not any more occurrences of shadows looming over her children, and she seemed satisfied with that. I don't recall ever seeing any moving shadows or ghouls in that part of my life, but there was something later, in my late teens, several occurrences of, well, what I can term as shadow people appearing. We had moved to British Columbia by this time. We're awarded citizenship for some years. I was finishing high school, well adjusted, lots of friends at school and even in the building that we lived in. My two brothers and sister were friends with all the other kids and teens who also lived in our building, and the neighboring apartments as well. This was in the early 2000s, before kids had cell phones or even spent time on computers really. We were always doing something outside in groups, having fun and just causing a ruckus. In fact, I don't even think a day was spent inside. If we could help it, we didn't need money or reason to just roam about at the very least, and more often than not, we had our regular haunts and meet-up spots. I remember one particular night though. I was maybe 17 or perhaps 18, where I had an experience that was quite jarring and was also shared with my brother. So I had been sleeping and woke up, paralyzed, unable to move or speak. But to my horror, there was sitting in this chair beside my bed a shadow man with red eyes. His energy was malevolent and contemptuous. He didn't speak, just sat there, and even though I couldn't see a mouth, I knew that he was grinning. I could sort of see the outline of it. He was definitely a man, but just made of shadow that my eyes couldn't see through. He was watching me struggle to break my paralysis for what felt like 5 or 6 minutes. Obviously, I was terrified and couldn't keep a straight thought in my head, but I was trying to somehow run away, even though it was impossible. I remember making mewling noises and moaning, trying to scream, but everything was paralyzed. Even though my mouth was agape and I couldn't shut it, I still couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but try to scream, and it was just coming out as muffled noises. In that moment, I could feel that this shadow being was deriving pleasure from my anguish. He was just sitting there, about 4 feet away from me, as clear as anything else in the dark room, just staring at me with those red eyes. Then, all of a sudden, he stood up, belched out an evil chuckle, and zipped away in the direction of my brother's room down the hall. He flew at an alarming speed. Weirdly, too, I could see 2 trails of red light as his eyes left along with the shadow body, at which point I snapped out of my paralysis. As soon as he left my room, the paralysis, it broke. All I could focus on was his laugh before he left, and honestly, I thought that it was over, that this thing zipped away out of the apartment back to, well, wherever it is that it came from. At that, I got out of bed and went to the kitchen to get a drink of water. I was shaken up, I'll admit, but I was convinced that this was just a weird, vivid dream of some sort. It did feel real, as normal as life, in fact, as real as talking to another person. And I mean, I definitely seemed to be awake. I wasn't sleeping. But while I stood there slowly drinking my cold water, I heard the same muffled screams that I was making coming from somewhere down the hall. It was coming from the last room, my middle brother's room. I walked over there and listened by his door, and yes, he was making noises, so I opened his door and I froze as I saw a portion of the air on top of him was dark, darker than the already dark room. It was like a cloud was sort of hanging over him, and he looked sort of paralyzed like I was, and he was moaning exactly like I was too. I can only describe it as sort of silently screaming, but I ran over and shook him awake. It took a few seconds, but I shook him hard and eventually he came to. He looked at me with eyes wide in fear and said that there was a shadow man with red eyes laughing at him while he made him frozen. He said that he woke up paralyzed as this shadow man came into the room, and this thing was standing above him the whole time laughing and just watching him struggle. Honestly, I could barely believe it. I told him that it just happened to me too, and that I heard him from the kitchen. I told him how it left my room and went in the direction of his room after it let me go, and both of us had trouble sleeping that night. It was the most surreal experience that I've ever had. This was the first time any paralysis happened to him as well, and the first time anything like this event had ever happened. He wasn't into any paranormal stuff, and it was a shock to him that things like this could even happen. He never took my mother's story seriously, I suppose. He was always just as level-headed and grounded as my father. Unlike me, I did have an interest in these things, and UFOs, ghosts and the such, but I also remember this as a shocking first time. It was sort of an assault on my reality, even if I was open-minded to the paranormal. In any case, we told our mum about it the next day, and she immediately blamed a jinn. She was reminded of the time that she saw a shadowy presence in my room back in Saudi Arabia. We couldn't stop her from praying in our rooms and lighting her incense to clear the bad air. And it must have worked as, well, I never felt that presence return. But it certainly wasn't the last time that I saw a shadow being. It was never as blatant and in your face as the first time, but it happened many times more. I've told this story to many people and shared it online even, and have never heard of a case where the shadow being attacked two people consecutively. So, was this just a case of sleep paralysis hallucinations? But how did me and my brother share this delusion if that's truly what it was? To this day, we still talk about it. I had many other sleep paralysis encounters with shadow beings, but never like that first time, never as malevolent, and never again shared with another person. In fact, I get sleep paralysis quite often now, even had it last night, but I haven't had a shadow being during these times in 20 years or more. I guess I've just become used to it now, waking up, unable to move, and have learned to keep calm until it passes, which it always does in a minute or so. There were many other times I've seen the shadow people during waking hours, fleetingly, in the peripherals of my vision, darting by. As have others, I know. Other times I've seen them when entering a dark room before turning a light on, after which they always disappear. I guess I just got used to them, I suppose. They seemed fairly harmless, and eventually I just stopped noticing them. I figured after some time and study that they, most likely being jinn, were just sort of living their lives, and that the veil that separates our lives from theirs can become thin, rendering them somewhat visible or lets their presence be felt. Reading about jinn as much as I could, I have learned that they have lives like we do. They have children apparently, duties, can be good and tolerant, or, well, downright mean. Some are interested in pranks, some can grant boons, and some can possess you even. But I have read that possessions are exceedingly rare. I've even read that they have religions. They can believe in God. Being shapeshifters, their most common form is a shadow in the shape of a human. But perhaps that's also the most common way that our minds can grasp them. Maybe our eyes can only catch them in a certain visual frequency or something. They have their favorite dwellings, but can appear anywhere, which means that they're not locked in a location in ways that ghosts